Heather, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've been looking forward to this for such a long time since our long last conversation. And I know that it's late for you and that you're an early to bed gal, so thank you for staying up. And I wanted to start like way back. I did like even before you became an agent. I want to start with how you got into the publishing industry, how you got into editing in the first place. Can you
Ah,
do that?
well, I was that kid. If you want to go way, way back, I was that kid that got, bookworm awards at camp for, sitting there in the bunk with a book in my hand all of the time. But I actually got into publishing a rather strange way. I had moved to Southern California after college and was working at a consulting firm. And we were helping Disney start an adult trade publishing unit. And I thought, oh, you can get paid for reading books. Like, sign me up. And I quit my job, moved back to the East Coast, got an editorial assistant position at Berkeley Publishing, which was then part of Putnam Berkeley before it became the massive PRH eventually. Um, Became an editor within 3 years. I don't know how detailed you want me to be. I then, went on to continue to edit for over 22 years until I decided to quit my job when I had 8 years of college ahead to pay for my kids. Made no sense on paper. Quit my job and become an agent. That's that's a lot of years all in one little nibble.
Well, okay, couple questions right away. You said it made no sense on paper, and I love decisions that made no sense on paper because I made a lot of them. So I want to know why it made sense despite the paper. Like what,
Uh,
so just to fill everyone else in, you were at the time senior editor at Simon& and Schuster, is that correct?
I was actually an executive editor, vice president at Crown Publishing,
Oh.
which is part of Penguin Random House. And on paper, what is better than great benefits and having an assured paycheck every 2 weeks. My husband is a writer, so from a standpoint of financial sense, it made sense for me to stay within a more corporate structure. But the why did I do it is probably what you're after, and it really was there was this moment when I realized that if I had been wooed by an agent to come work for him for David Black. Um, and it was when I had this realization that I had been getting creatively stultified. I could only really work in one lane. If you have success as an editor within publishing, a lot of times you get pushed into doing a lot of the same things over and over, and or same genres, I should say. Um, and I realized that I could come to this side of the desk and advocate for and work on all the things that delighted me. And I had thought when I first got into publishing that would include fiction and more narrative driven works. And, as my career developed as an editor, it became very much practical, prescriptive works. And so it was oh my goodness, I can play with all of these things that did it. It was that was the why. I
And that was about 16 years ago, if I'm is my
uh,
right?
I quit Random in April of 2016.
Okay.
Went to David's for about a year and change, and then I decided to take the jump again and start the agency in September of 2017. So it's 8 years now, 9 years as an agent, but 8 years with the agency.
So how's it been?
The first couple of years, it's like, a triple espresso every day. You're, really scrambling um, to set up set your authors up and set yourself up so that you can eat, right? That's the first few years. Um, but it's exactly what I wanted to create a place where I can be passionate for and advocate for authors, and try and bring their words to life, and also be able to follow my own editorial passions wherever they lead. So that has been, I think that if anyone were to look at the agency's website, you'll see some people might call it a dog's breakfast. I don't think so. You'll see a lot of different interests. It almost looks like an imprint as opposed to, um, just an agent, a singular agent's works. So I'm proud of that. It's done really well.
Well, so that brings me to a question about um, that came out of the last conversation that we
Okay.
had, where we were talking about actually what you and I do, you as an agent, me as a dev editor and teacher, that kind of constantly kind of we're 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 complicit in moving writing in a certain direction, right?
Mhm.
And but yet, as you and I both love kind of atypical fiction, so kind of so we're also guilty of moving the market away from what we wish the market ideally was. So I wanted to ask you a couple of tough questions here. One is that how do you make the choice, between when the manuscripts come to you, between choosing what you love, which is, why you leapt over the desk in the first place,
Mhm.
and what you think can sell? Like what happens nowadays to the books? And I edit them all the time, books that I love, but I know will be a tough sell right from the start. Like how are you making those choices?
Well, I think that you can't only make those choices. I think that you have to be pragmatic enough to realize that if you are to represent your authors properly, you need to have as diverse an ecosystem as possible so that you can take the chances on the books that you love and know will be all but impossible to find a home for, but you're willing to push for because you believe in the talent, you believe in the writing, you believe in the story, whatever the genre happens to be. But it is, I think that I make some choices that provide, frankly, a rather solid kind of a steady state of income so that I can take the chances on the things that I know editors may say, this genre, memoir is not selling right now. We've done too many books within you X marks whatever spot it is. I do think that you have to be marketplace aware when you are going out with something, but I don't think that should be the sole deciding factor as to why to represent. Because if we didn't do the things that they don't know they want yet, then a lot of books wouldn't be born, and a lot of kind of bookshelves wouldn't exist. I mean, I think backwards to my first book with Tim Ferriss as his editor, and it came in 26 out of 27 editors had said no. Came in with a title of Drug Dealing for Fun and Profit. Um, he had no platform, and yet I thought there was something special there. And I remember reading that and thinking, this person has an intriguing voice and has really interesting information. If I was, if I had said no, would this person have then gone on to, multiple books, a billion downloads now on his podcast, which is extraordinary. And also a whole bookshelf that was born from that type of voice on the page and that type of mix of self-help and more narrative personal information on the page. I think, sorry, I don't know if I answered your question. I think I might have gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. Um, I choose the things that I believe in strongly and that I think that I can be of use and advocate for passionately. But can I tell an author that it will sell. No, you can't because you don't control that. And the only things you control are making sure that it is as good as it can possibly be and that you've done as much due diligence in finding the right partners and right imprints to present the work to. Um,
So talking about partners and imprints, um, with your background in it, on the other side of the desk, as you call it, you must have many, many contacts like in the industry. But when you have a manuscript that you think, gosh, this is going to take such an unusual editor, and I actually don't know any editor that, fits that particular profile. How do you go about finding them? Like, how do you go about meeting them?
Well, meeting editors when you're in New York City and you've been in the publishing industry for a long time is not a hard thing. Doing research on who is doing what is also relatively easy if you have access to Publishers Marketplace, and or again, leaning on relationships. If there's something I think is special, I've been around long enough that I can call up a Reagan Arthur or Sally Kim or someone who is making the decisions and say who might be a great fit for this. So it's a combination of diving into what editors are buying through that database on Publishers Marketplace, and then just the human touch, reaching out to those I know and seeing. First, you get to pitch to the people who will be making the ultimate decision, but you also get to have them uh, point you in the direction of someone that you may not have known yet. Um,
Is it still the way it was rumored to have once been? I don't know because I was never in New York publishing, but where the agent editor lunch is still an important part of the business, or has that gone since COVID?
it's not gone, but it's not in any way, shape, or form the same. Before COVID, before the pandemic hit, you could very easily go out to lunches and drink dates and breakfasts and coffees and such 3 or 4 times a week, and certainly no fewer than twice a week. And it's been much slower to open up. Um, yes, I'm going out with editors and publishers now, but I would say, most of the time you're looking at like once or twice a week. It was so embedded in the fabric of business prior. A lot of people just, they got used to Zoom. They kind of like it. um, and then there's also the fact that so many people are so overwhelmed with work, which I think is endemic in publishing right now, that and perhaps we're also, culturally pathologically productive. So those things have taken away some of that socialization. So I hope that it, at some point or another, climbs up there, because I think the one-on-one is where some of the magic can happen. You're sitting across the table and you're talking about one of your authors, or you're just talking about something that's happening in the world, and an idea gets sparked, and a book project ultimately, is born. But yeah, it's not the same. There are fewer parties. It's just, it's not the same. A lot of people like email too much. Sorry. I don't even want to talk to people.
Well, turning things around, how how has the industry changed in terms of the relationships with your authors? So, I hear both. I hear from some authors that the advent of Zoom means that they actually, especially if they're working from the West Coast and their agents on the East Coast, that now they actually get to see their agent face to face, whereas before sometimes it was a phone call or a lot of times it was email. Now a Zoom call is just as fast. But I also hear the opposite, which is that you actually get to see your agent less now that the culture of all the editorial departments being overworked, like pushes a lot of the quality control and the editing down to the agents. And then so the agents are like doing more than ever before. And so the time per author is less? Like how do you see the market right now? And also, where I know that because I know that an answer could be there's such a range as as I'm sure there are because of all the different personalities and agencies. But where does specifically your agency fit? How'd you run your business in terms of your authors?
So yeah, I can't speak for other agents and how much time they give to a project, how much face time they have with their authors, basically what role they think the agent has. Because I certainly do know, again, having been around for a long time, that some agents think, okay, my job is to get this book in front of publishers, it's to sell it, it's to negotiate the best deal, and then kind of out until it's time for the next payment to come through. And that's never been an approach that I think would ever work for me. As somebody again steeped in editorial and growing up there, I know that the success of a book is not something we control, but to have as successful a launch for a book, to give it as much of an opportunity out in the marketplace as possible, I believe that an author deserves to have an advocate that's with them throughout the whole of the process. So it's not just the sale of the book; it's going through cover copy and cover and looking at jacket ideas and going back and forth. Before you sell the book, going back and forth on the proposal or the manuscript and making sure it's as good as it can be, using the old editorial skills to help them there. But letting them know that they have an advocate every step of the process, up to the launch and past the launch of the book, I think is incredibly important. That's how I do things, which is why, and I don't, and I hope that my authors all feel that I am always available to them. I'd like to believe that, they feel um, as if they are kind of my one and only. And I don't know that that's possible, but I aim for that to be possible because I think it's really, really hard to be a writer. I think it's really, really hard to face the publishing world. I think it can be incredibly brutal. And so I want everyone I work with to know that I'm there. And so that it's also why my list is I'm never going to be an agent that is taking on so many clients that I have to be to pass authors on to an assistant. I was talking with an author friend of mine whose friend had signed with a big agency and was just so excited because they got the big, one of the three letters, as I call them. They got them on board. And then they never talked to that agent again. Everything was with the assistant. And I thought, um, that's a model that works for some people. It would never work for me. I don't know if I answered all your questions. Did I get them all in there?
You did.
Okay.
But it also is like a segue though to something that I wanted and I told everyone that I want to ask you about, which is the last time we spoke, I just really loved the metaphor when you said to me that you saw your job as helping your authors set the table. So I was wondering whether you can explain to everyone what you meant by that, because I was so impressed by it.
Okay. I think that, we started talking about what we have control over and what we don't have control over. And an author has control over what they craft and how well they craft it. And I see that my job is to make sure that as we are preparing that work for submission, that we are setting the table appropriately, because if you I'm trying to think because I had stated this differently when we talked, so I'm like I don't want, I would like to use the same metaphor again, but my brain is stretching for getting it. But it's, maybe this is more about going back to control. An author can do the very, very best job at writing a book possible, right? And to me, that is like setting the table. You put out your finest stemware, you have gorgeous, cutlery and beautiful wine, and you invite the most exciting guests to the table, right? And those guests are the editors that you're submitting to. and you plate the food and you sit down in front of them, and what you can't control is if the editor had just had like a late meal an hour ago and so they're not hungry anymore, so they're not gonna pick for that reason, or you gave them a paleo meal and they're vegan, a recent switch. Like the appetite an appetite an editor has for something is not going to be under the control of the author. But what is, and the agent, is that we try and set that table as beautifully as possible so that those who do come to it, if they are hungry, if they are kind of open and receptive, they will kind of eat it up. And I don't know if that's exactly what I used before, but I do think you have to you tee it up, right? And an author only really gets one chance to wow an editor with their work. So you have to make sure that they're giving the very best they can before you send it out, mixing all those together a bit.
I think a lot of people in this Zoom room will understand why it made such an impression on me because I I I'm someone who loves being in control of all the details, you know. So that metaphor of having someone helping someone to make sure that, oh, do you have the right salt cellar? Yes. Like, did
Yeah.
you, is that the right salt? Yes, so that made a lot of sense. And then another thing um that stuck in my mind, and we might as well talk about it now, was was your kind of acceptance of, or your recognition of rejection just being part of the process, right? Which I think that a lot of writers have a very, very hard time with. But then, and my friends and my writers go from the very, very newbies who are just giving their first idea its first shot, and authors who have, books in the tens or twenties. Um, and what strikes me all the time is that the pros, the ones who've done it, know that they'll be rejected, know that someone's going to ask them to edit it a certain way, and then it's going to go up another step in the editorial chain, and they're going to be asked to edit it back the other way. All of that stuff that is so hard for a lot of writers to kind of deal with. And so I was really impressed when you said that you thought that one of your part of your job was lying down on the floor with your authors when they get rejected. And I was actually wondering, how do you do that? How do you lie down with them?
Well, I think it's, that you never become callous to what it feels like for someone to say no. Um, but I think that when we were talking, what I really meant is that I mean, I hate rejection. It never feels good when someone is saying no to one of my authors, and it's hard sometimes not to take it personally. And I know better, right? I know that 90+% of a submission there's going to be a rejection to it. You can have a book that sells for an enormous amount of money at a multiple day auction and still have over 90% rejection. Um, and so I think that in the lying down on the floor, there are a few things there. It's a realization, a recognition that whenever an author is out there, even in the very nature of the word submission says an enormous amount, right? Here you are, literally laying yourself bare, lying down, as it were, on the floor. And you don't know if an editor is going to rub your belly, if they're going to kick it, if they're going to do anything else. And so, you know, as soon as you decide as an author to share your work with the world, you're going to have a whole slew of reactions to it that are not necessarily going to be the ones you want to have. And so I think that part of my job is, during the submission process is definitely to be on the floor there because it hurts, it sucks. But it's also sometimes just to shield. I don't think that every author, any author needs to have every single no sitting in their head, because I think that that could be a enormously not only painful, but a situation where people who were not the right fit ultimately, because that's what it is. At the end of the day, an editor decided that this was not something that they wanted to acquire. It's not, um, they're not God, they're not the almighty anything. It's someone who decided not to do it. So why should they take up real estate in your head? uh, if they're not the ones for you. So why should it's like letting a bad boyfriend, tell you bad things when you shouldn't be listening to them in the first place. So part of it is unless an author wants to see everything, I don't share it. And if there is constructive criticism within a rejection, then certainly if there are some themes that are recurring from multiple editors, I will share that if I think it's useful. But I don't think that I think that authors probably have enough going on inside their heads when it comes to the submission process. They don't need people who are not going to be their champions to be inside there too. Um,
So that makes me wonder, with the bad boyfriend, with the bad boyfriend analogy. It's so you're
or
screening
bad girlfriend. Sorry.
you're screening your author, you're seeing the rejections come in, and you're thinking, okay, you know, just a bad fit, not God. Somebody else can say yes. At what point, though, do you, and how, or is there a point? Like, how do you make the decision? Like, where does the decision come from where you think, okay, it's been out long enough. Um, we need to move on and focus on the next book or whatever. How's that decision made?
It really ranges. Sometimes it depends on what is important to an author. Sometimes an author would like a book published no matter where it's published. And I don't necessarily advise that one does that, because you don't get another opportunity to be a debut author. Um, but there are some stories and some instances where someone just wants a publishing home, and so you keep going until you hopefully. I sent out a project once that ended up at 63 different imprints before we got it. Yes. Um, Most of the time, if you in a first round, if you're not finding a home, if there is some thread that has run through the rejections, you can kind of sit down, talk through, uh, do we want to try and see about making some changes to the manuscript? Do we want to just try another round with some independent presses? It really does. The reason it varies. The answer is, like with so much in publishing, it varies. But if you're asking like when it's time to say, okay, let's just put this beautiful work aside for the moment and see if we can't focus on something new and hope that book one day gets, to find the readership that it deserves. And that's a hard, I think it's after as big an effort as one can make, um, and as an author can tolerate too, would be my answer on that one. Um, but I think the marketplace shifts, and something that didn't sell 2 years ago might sell 2 years from now. It can happen. Um, I have an author who had a first book that had lovely reviews and very limited sales, and it took over 8 years to find a new agent because her editor and agent had fired her after, to find a new agent. And that next book, uh, we sold in over 40 countries now, and has been a major hit. Like there is no secret formula to any of this. It's just belief and passion, and trying to do as good work as possible, both as an agent and that authors are putting that in. And so if an author is going to put in that effort and kind of torture themselves on the page, then I'm going to put as much effort as I can in trying to find them a home as possible until we don't have any place else to go and it doesn't make sense anymore. And then some authors want to then explore self-publishing, or it really it's everybody has a different path and different reason for writing, and different desires on what they're going to accomplish with it.
Do you work with any hybrid authors who self-publish some and traditionally publish others? And if so, like what is your involvement in the self-published book?
Um, I have an author who has published traditionally and has self-published one of her books. And with that book, I ended up representing TV and film and foreign rights. And you know, yeah, I generally have not had much experience in the hybrid publishing world, but that would be one. And right now we're waiting on, we had on January 7th. So, just as the fires started to uh, explode around LA, we were having a meeting at NBC about doing the book. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. But yeah,
Fingers crossed for you.
fingers crossed. Yes.
Mm.
But I wish I could. I can't give much. I wish I could tell more on the hybrid. It's just not. Um, the limited knowledge I have is, if you're going to do hybrid, you almost might want to do it yourself. That would be my limited knowledge, and don't listen to me necessarily, because I have some friends who've done the hybrid, not authors, and they end up doing a lot of the heavy lifting, if not most of it. So I feel if
Talking
that's going
about,
to be,
sorry,
well,
you're talking about authors who are using hybrid presses where,
yeah,
okay, yeah, right. Yeah.
yeah, some author friends. And so this is me talking from a friend standpoint as opposed to an agent. But what I've seen in the conversations I've had with them is that the expectation of them to put their own money into uh, jackets, marketing, publicity. I feel if you're going to do that, then why not have all of the rights to it instead of splitting it? Many of the hybrids, from what I understand, are about a 50-50 split. And I don't know that I think that's particularly equitable. But it
Hmm.
all depends. Again, some people
Hmm.
like doing more of the lift and less of the distribution lift, right?
Right. So actually, when I used hybrid, I used it in a slightly different sense. I was using it to describe authors who published, either self-published,
Oh, like
but they'll have some books one way and some books traditionally published. And what I'm hearing
gotcha.
is that you consider them still your authors. You're still there to help them with the sub rights and the foreign rights, etc. It's not as if you are not involved in those books. Your involvement changes with those books. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I've never believed that if you sign an author, you're looking at, I'm representing this one book. It may work out that that's how it works, right? That a person doesn't write another one or you don't work together again. But I think of, how can I be there for the career of this person? And the if somebody decides not to do a trade version of a book, it doesn't mean that suddenly they may not need an ear, an eye, a hand, in navigating those waters. So I like to kind of stick around.
And how about genre jumping? So, you were saying how that your website, some people might think looks like a dog's breakfast, which I think is a very unflattering way to put it, but it's certainly you certainly have like all, you have all kinds of fiction there. You have different kinds of nonfiction there. But do you are you have you had authors who go from one genre to another? And what happens when they go into a genre that you actually don't currently represent? So is it is it a, some Asians like to stay, not maybe only in one genre, but at least in a cluster of genres without spreading themselves too thin in other genres. How do you feel?
I, I think that, if I really think I can't be of any value to an author in a space that they're moving into, then I'll say, hey, I'm not the one for you. If I think that it's intriguing enough to me and that I can learn and use a kind of a beginner's approach to be of help, and I think that that beginner's mindset could be incredibly useful in asking the kind of questions and pushing in a direction that you might not, if you already knew everything about a particular way of doing something, you may just kind of phone it in. I think sometimes not knowing can be incredibly exciting intellectually, and if I can feel that I can do that, then I will jump on board. I haven't had authors do much by way of genre jumping. I have had like slight leaps, right? Moving from like a thriller to more romantic suspense, or from paranormal romance to a different type of speculative work. They've been slight shifts. But the one area that I have not had, I would say, if anybody is writing children's books, don't come to me. I really would love to be useful, and I have sold some, but it is not a space that I have been able to really help my authors in a way that I think they deserve. So I don't know the answer to, the is there an area that if I don't feel that I can be of value, I don't come on board is the only way. I think that my brain loves to be challenged, so I don't mind learning something new. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking of my brain has been challenged by lots of Zooms today, so I'm a little tired, and I apologize because I feel like I'm not giving very crisp answer here. Um,
I think I understand you completely. Um,
okay.
and oh, but now talking about tired brains, I just dropped that one. Uh, Genre jumping. Oh, yes, I was going to ask you, enjoying challenges and everything. So is there a genre then, is there a genre then where you don't actually have any authors right now, but
Um,
where you're attracted to that genre and you want to be in that genre? And is there anything that is exciting you?
that's a good one. I mean, I have wanted a great juicy family story, something historical, something saga-y, that's not, it's not like saying I want, a romantasy author. Um, I don't know that I've ever approached publishing in quite that way, right? The manuscript wish list thing is something that I think is wonderful. I'm on the I know it when I see it. And uh I mean, I know some of the things that I don't spark to generally. Like science fiction is not frequently where I get excited. But if you had told me that I would represent, shape-shifting werewolves, I would have told you what, or, a romance between a waitress and death. Like that would not have been something I would have said. So, I'd have to say I don't know the answer to that one. Yeah, yeah. I feel
Well,
like I should have prepared an answer for that one because I'm sure that there are some wonderful things that I'm not thinking of right now that I'd say, yes, Sharon, that's exactly what I would like to see more of, but I don't know right now. Just something that just delights and excites. And I mean, my whole thing has been if you're someone who's in publishing and you're reading nonstop, a book that can just make you breathless and make you stop doing everything else. That's always what I'm looking for, and it doesn't have to be in a particular space, except for science fiction. I still think that I probably wouldn't be the best for that. That world
science
building is
fiction
is
and
is
children.
tricky. And children, yeah.
Okay, so on that basis then, this like this looking for this looking to fall in love with a book basically. And not fall in love gently, it sounds like looking to be smacked by a book. So so that raises a couple of questions to me. So first of all, um how do you handle your submissions? Are you open to submissions right now? Like, can these 70 wonderful people send you a submission through? Do you use Query Tracker, or are you only open certain months of the year, or how do you take
I've never closed for submissions. I haven't but I've also never accepted anything other than query letters. And on the website, and it's query at hjlit.com, is where I ask everybody to send. You know, if someone on this call wanted to send a query, I would definitely put in the subject line that they were on this Zoom. But no, I've never, I may be slower sometimes in getting to the slush pile. I have two wonderful interns who help me sort through it. So sometimes it's slower than faster, but I never close it down.
Do you know do you have an idea like what slow and fast means in your case? Like,
Oh, well, you mean insofar as like if a query arrives when someone I don't respond to queries unless I'm interested in seeing some portion of the work, and it's not to be a jerk. It really is just kind of controlling for
yeah.
how many hours in a day I have.
Mhm.
Um, and, I remember when I first started doing that, it feels kind of awful to, because I know, again, my husband is a writer. I know like that waiting is an awful
Mhm.
thing. And I feel like I need to figure out a way to fix that, but I don't know what that is. Maybe there's some tech that will help so that authors know that that they're not going to get a request for a partial. But usually, I'd say if you've sent a query and you haven't heard from me in about 4 weeks, then you're not going to hear. And then when I do request, I usually will request the first 100 or 150 pages. Um, I really try to make it no more than 3 to 6 weeks to hear back, because I feel once it's in my hands, they every author deserves a response. And I do tell people that if somehow they haven't heard from me, to please ping me, because either I've gotten avalanched by something or something's gone astray in the ether when it comes to respond to getting them a response to their work.
Mhm. And which brings us to the subject of first pages,
Yeah.
which is something that you and I have talked about before, again, and how we actually might shape literature in a way that we don't like. We don't want
Mm.
literature to be shaped, but I actually once a friend of mine who is an acquisitions editor was on a panel with some agents and realized that she sounded so much um, less patient, shall we say, than the agents did. And then all of a sudden cottoned onto the what was going on and said, you know what, we have our runways are different lengths, right? It's like you guys are looking for a client that you can kind of foster and work with. And so, by the time it comes to me, I'm expecting I have only this much runway. It needs to be right. And so when pressed, she said her runway was actually that first page, not even 5 pages. If she's not at the end of the first page, like, okay, there's something here, you're done. So do you have a runway length?
It,
Like, how much time does someone have to catch you?
it really depends on if you're talking about the query letter or if you're talking about the actual text. And again, I don't know that there's a formula. Sometimes, I'll talk about queries first. If somebody is saying, this is 150,000 words, in a genre that's supposed to only have 70,000, that will be an immediate. I won't even get to the what is it. It says to me, this is an author that's not aware of what the work needs, what the industry is requiring, right? So sometimes it is something as simple as seeing that there's a lack of awareness of what the audience is reading. Um, when it comes to pages that I've requested, I've had I've never done one page unless it's just such extraordinarily bad writing that you're like, okay, this person, which again, that has not happened frequently because if you write a decent query letter, you usually are going to be able to craft something that can hold uh, someone's attention. But I would say, certainly within those first 20 pages, um, I think that I would talk to editors who their runway is 5 pages or 10 pages. Like if they're not captured within that because they're getting so many submissions, I equate it to a fire hose to the face at all times. That is what an author is contending with. Like imagine their work getting through that wall of water that's going at full force at an editor. So you and I talked about how that's changing the propulsive nature of literature. I think that everything has to be fast, 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 hook, 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 hook. You know, um, and our attention spans, are demanding it because of the way the industry is constructed. But I don't know that I have an exact runway. I do know that if I'm not taken enough by it within 20 pages, I'm probably not going to keep going. But sometimes sometimes the first 100 pages are wonderful, and then the wheels come off the bus later. And the question becomes, is it fixable, or do you see a way that it can be fixable? And, oftentimes then we will, send some notes and say, think about doing this and, be happy to take another look. But I hate to say the same thing that you probably hear all of the time. It really is varied, you know, um, but the way to keep, I think, an agent or an editor or anybody on this kind of the side of the side of the desk too, because writers are is to write as brilliantly as you can, to make it undeniable that you have the ability to craft something special. So if you can get them on that line by line basis, um, then maybe you can hook them for longer and they get to see how the story and everything. I'm thinking fiction right now is going to unfold. Um,
So
yeah,
the only substitute for that quick hook is writing that is so beautiful you want to stay in it, even if you're not
yeah,
quite sure where it's going
yeah,
quite. Well, at least that's
I
more
think
a
so.
little bit more hopeful than just you have to get them in, because we're doing Lisa and Heather Lazar and I are doing a first pages workshop. I was telling you earlier, this weekend, and it is all about how propulsive that opening needs to be. But anyone who knows my stuff also knows that it hurts me deeply. I love quiet books. Most of the authors on my shelf are in fact English authors because for some reason the English reading public can take a slower start. And I love just the atmosphere and the
But
slow
it
sink into the bath instead of the
but it may not be that the English reading public is what it might be the English publishing industry that is different. They may not be quite as pathologically productive. I'll use that again. That they might not be so overwhelmed that um, everything has to be fast, fast, fast.
oh.
Almost everything has to be that shiny, that bright shiny object. I liken it sometimes to, when you're trying to submit a project to an editor, imagine that it's like you're submitting like chocolates, right? Editors love chocolate. They eat them every day. They get boxes and boxes and boxes of them. And so sometimes, they can look at this gorgeous array and pick out one and take like a little nibble and throw it out. And what they're looking for is that like gold foil wrapped, amazing piece they've never tasted before, rather than understanding that maybe there's something interesting to that simple plain dark chocolate that if you let it sit in your mouth a little bit longer, it will be like the most amazing flavor you had. So yeah, to your point, I don't know how much of it is um our reading culture being affected by publishing culture.
That is
But
so
that said,
interesting. I never thought of that. That the reading publics could be the same, but that in between you have the publishing industry. Hmm.
yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for that.
Well, I
Um,
don't. It's a theory, it's an opinion. One of the things that I will say that like with strength here is that in publishing, everybody will very frequently state as fact that which is purely opinion. So, one should take everything with a grain of salt. Because what I think works, right, is something that may work for me. What somebody else thinks is effective works for them. But I do think that it's pretty clear that within fiction now, you do have to hook an editor very quickly. There's just no question about it.
there's no way
Um,
around it. Oh, actually,
yeah.
which raises the question, have you, I've heard discussion of maybe the strategy of for the beautifully crafted but quiet books of actually going to the UK publishers first. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, but the UK is a much smaller market. I have not had it work that you've suddenly, gotten to the UK first and then had some major publisher in the US say, "Oh, we missed this." Um, what happens frequently is if you go to the UK as a US author, um, and you don't have a US publisher, they, and again, this is often, but remember I was saying everybody states as fact, so I'm trying to carefully choose my words here. Oftentimes they want the US publisher behind a book because it can help them promote and publish their own work. They're not going to look at as favorably towards a work that didn't find a U.S. home, and and that can work the same way. A British author trying to find a place in the US without having found a UK publisher is going to have a harder climb. Um, and it doesn't mean that you can't try it. Like if you can't find it, why not? You never know. There may be certain genres that are working, certain types of fiction that is working there that isn't here right now. So you give it a go. But it generally doesn't generally doesn't work out, but not necessarily always.
Okay, interesting. So we're 1 minute away from 6:30, and I want to leave about half an hour for everybody else to ask their questions. But I want to just wind this up on what you were saying about how, you know, it's all opinions. So I'm
Yeah.
now asking specifically for your opinion.
Okay. I am a woman of strong opinion, so I can do that.
You don't have to qualify it. We know. But what I would like to get from you is kind of an idea of kind of what works and what doesn't. And in order to frame that in a way that is easier to put our arms around, maybe if you could share some thoughts on the mistakes that so you mentioned earlier, for example, that if you see a query for a genre that usually is like 70,000 words and it comes in at 140, you're like, okay, you're not paying attention to the market, so I don't have to pay attention to you. So what other big kind of stumbles do you see a lot of writers make? And conversely, what are the things that um, that most impress you when you see it? And I know that we've talked now about being fast and like being hooky in the beginning, but also the quality, the beauty of the writing, and also being different so that you stand out in that box of chocolates. But is there anything else that's like that, that might kind of like help writers to at least give them ideas as to how to approach their query letters and or position
Um,
their
s-
strength or
so for the query letter, and ask me again if I miss any piece of that. Um, First, I would say if anyone wants to go to the agency's Instagram account, we've posted in the past some kind of top query letter writing tips. Some things around like typos and kind of what not to do there. What I would say would be my biggest piece of advice to any author who is querying is to treat that query letter with the same kind of care and attention to detail as they would a full chapter of a book. Take as much time with its crafting because it has to do an inordinate amount of heavy lifting. For one, it has to go through that, I talk about submissions, as a fire hose to the face when it comes to editors, but you have to, literally have that query get through the pile up within an agent's inbox as well. And so that heavy lifting is when you work on it, you're showing the quality of your writing, you're showing the quality of your thought around the business of writing. You're showing that you have the ability to understand where your book would fit within the larger publishing world and where it would fit on a shelf as well. Um, that's just that alone is a lot to accomplish in a page. Then you're trying to hook them into and almost imagine the query letter. I think some of the best query letters are um, almost like jacket copy combination of here's who I am and here's the jacket copy, but not quite that on the nose. But if you look at many, I would love Sharon if you've talked with other agents about this. I know that when we're doing kind of our pitches to publishers, the query letter that becomes oftentimes foundation for the submission letter that an agent is doing is becomes the catalog copy and the jacket copy, or at least big chunks of it. So that positioning way up front is so important. Um, when it comes to things not to do, like again, look out for typos. That's one thing that like people will like. I know as a former editor, if I see them, even though I send voice texts where I sound like an idiot, right? When it comes to the business, you want to make sure that is the representation of you. And as a writer, you don't want to have something foolish like a typo standing in the way of some persnickety person like me. Um, I would say for me, I don't want somebody to quote back to me my words from my website or my words from any piece of anything because that's wasted space. I know my own words. Show me yours. Don't tell me what I like. Convince me that I should, read your work. So I feel like that's wasted space. Don't try and woo me with a knowledge of what I'm doing because that's immaterial. I know what I'm doing, right? I want to know what you're doing as a writer. Um, yeah, I think I don't know if there's more, but that's like off the top of my head. But there are some additional tips within the agency's Instagram account. We tried to have some fun with it too.
That's great. I'm gonna go look those up myself. Um,
Okay.
just a couple of specifics though. How about comps? Because some agents kind of think, oh, well, actually, comps are my job. So do your best, but don't, kill yourself over them. And other people are like, no, I need your comps because that's how I'm going to
Yeah,
guess what you think you're writing.
and that's such an individual thing. I think, I personally don't need them in a query letter. A good line of text that anchors the story. And you could certainly say this, would be for readers of X, Y, or Z, sure. But to really go all out on the comps, not for me. But mostly because like I was an editor for 5 million years and I don't believe in the comp system. And that's a story for another day. I just think it's unfair shorthand that is used all around the business, and it's part of it. Sales demands it, buyers demand it, everybody demands it. But I think that someone who's not embedded in publishing is not going to necessarily know the right comps to use, and so that can hurt an author more than it helps them sometimes if they're using the outliers of all outliers, the books that are the biggest sellers when they're trying to pitch themselves and they're a debut author. That's going to fall short a lot of times, so for me, I don't need them in. I do think that they are important to uh, to be aware of. You need to understand again where your book sits, and whether or not where you're writing is something that the book marketplace is gobbling up right now. But for me, I think it's a system. I think it's a broken system. And now it's, you can't have comps that are more than 2 to 3 years old. They can never be the biggest of the big sellers. And there's so many different rules that apply to it that again, this is just me. I want to be wowed by the writing. I think that we can figure out together, the best comps later down the road as needed. I
Okay,
mean,
and
comps you give them to editors so that editors can literally run their P&Ls, and show their sales teams and their marketing and publishers like where this, will fit. Um, but if you don't do the right ones, it's not going to help. It's not going to help. It's going to do the opposite of help. So okay, go ahead, ask Shush.
now my last question before I turn it over to everyone here is you mentioned quickly that you have to get you imagine your query letter has to like jump out of the pile on your desk. And I just thought, how big is that pile? Like, just so that we see what your reality is. Like, how many queries do you get in a week, do you think?
I haven't done a count for them. Um, because I'm not always looking at the slush pile every week. Um, I mean, I can say probably somewhere in the range of 200-ish a week
You
is
had,
probably about right. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that sets the temperature, right? I think that
yeah.
um a lot of writers are always so surprised by like how much goes. I remember when I was a publisher, I got a letter once from someone who was really upset that I only sent a little form rejection, and and they made it on the surface a good point, which is that they'd gone to all that trouble to write to me. I could at least like write to them back and tell them why I had rejected it. And I was like you said, but it's a matter of math. If I did that for everyone, I would not be publishing any books, you know.
Yeah.
The
And that's how I feel when it comes to, any client that I'm working with. I'm not going to give them short shrift for someone that is not a client yet, right? It's not fair to the authors I'm working with to literally spend that time that could be spent on their work. And the slush pile, sorry, it's a horrible word, but it's not the only thing that an agent is doing, right? I right now have it in my inbox, a good 900 pages of reading ahead of me over the next, week or so, and more coming. Like there's always something else that is being done. So it's not, again, I don't think that it's a perfect system for how to get um, authors in front of us. I don't know what the fix is to that, but I do think that we're humans doing the best we can within it. And I wish that, I wish that every author would get an opportunity to to be heard. Um, but yeah, I don't know how you change the fact that this is more art than science, that it requires, if I'm reading a manuscript, if it's for editorial purposes, you're talking sometimes the 10 to 15 pages an hour because you're going really slowly. Those hours add up, and you've got to spend them, you know, taking care of the clients that you have. Which is why I never, if I don't have room in my slate, I'm not going to just, say, hey, let's work together, because I don't think it's fair to, I don't think it's ever fair to an author to have someone, you had asked earlier, and I don't think I really answered this, like when you just kind of take a chance on something. I never represent anything that I don't believe strongly in. I don't think it's fair. I think that's a cynical way to approach publishing. And as an editor, anytime I ever said, "Oh, that might work," and I didn't have my heart in it, it never works. I don't, and I think author, it's hard enough. They deserve their for their agent to be just head over heels with what they're doing, because again, they're going to be facing enough from the publishing industry. Their advocates shouldn't be lukewarm on their work. Um, Sorry, it was very long-winded.
No, no,
Maybe I need more tea.
thank you so much. And now while you have a sip of tea, does anybody else have a question? You want to raise your hands? And wow, that was very quick on the draw. Okay, George, you're up first. Just let me add your spotlight. Off you go.
I'm George Sorensen. I write narrative nonfiction. And in fact, to the invitation to this event tonight, she said you represented narrative nonfiction and said, George, pay attention, or something like that afterwards. I've had good luck with smaller independent publishers and I have 4 books out. One was brought out last April. How can I move to an agent to get me a larger publisher? And will you pay attention to the query that I would send you?
So if you put in the subject line, it's George Sorensen from Shirin's Thing, I will absolutely pay attention to the query that you send. Um, Insofar as how do you get an agent? Can you refresh me on the second part of that? I'm sorry. You were
How,
asking a moving from independent publisher.
right. How much not narrative nonfiction do you do, and what about it gets your attention?
Ah, um, it's disparate. I have a work that I'm doing with a journalist called Stimming While Manly. It's an exploration of masculinity and autism and what it's like to navigate a world that's not set up for you, that has no definition for you. Um, gosh, I realize my earbuds are
about
Wearing
stuff.
out. Hold on a second.
But I don't want to do. I feel like I know that I know myself very well. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Um,
we can hear you fine.
I know
Mhm.
myself well. I'll start talking about my authors and start talking about the projects and not answer your question properly. The my interests really are various, and sometimes I don't know it until I see it. Um, I'm working on a narrative book that's around family separation, right? And toxic masculinity and autism. So it is rather varied. But making the move from an independent publisher to a traditional one, if that is part of the question, some of that is predicated on what the book idea is and what what your past sales are. Publishers are always going to look at those. If those sales have been strong or at least been solid, that will be helpful. But the one good news when it comes to narrative nonfiction is it is such an idea-driven space that if that next idea is something that ignites and first an agent's and then an editor's interest, you can definitely find a bigger publisher to come on board. Narrative nonfiction is one of those spaces that is not as you don't necessarily need to have as massive a platform by way of social media and other things as prescriptive nonfiction demands. That answer, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, George. And
I look forward to
Samantha.
reading your query.
Thank you, Heather. And now we have, and now we have, oops, Julie. You somehow, we lost Sheila somehow. So,
Okay.
oh, Samantha, there you go. I'll try you again later. Okay, so Julie, what's your question?
Thank you so much, Heather, for being here. So I am a journalist for my day job, and I'm working on a book project that emerged from my reporting about this mysterious art find that's been called San Francisco's greatest art mystery, about a trove of artwork that surfaced on a park bench, almost 50 pieces of art that turned out to be by an obscure but important Jewish artist who died alone in Nazi-occupied Paris. And what I'm struggling with is kind of the container for the book. And I'm trying it both as narrative nonfiction and as historical fiction. And what I'm liking about the historical fiction route is that I get to sort of go back in these layers of history and imagine scenes between some of these characters in the different time periods that this book project kind of connects with. But the issue that I'm having is that because the art was found by people in contemporary times who are still alive, who I know personally from interviewing them for this project, can I write historical fiction with contemporary characters? And I also can't change the names because part of the magic of this story is that the person who found the art happens to have the same name as the artist who made the art. So that, and there's many weird things like this throughout this story, these odd parallels. So it's like part of the art magic of this story. So I also can't change that. So I'm just wondering if you've ever come across this in historical fiction and if you have any advice for me.
I've not come across it in historical fiction in quite that way, where there's contemporary people who are still alive that would be part of the story. I would suspect that if you want to have kind of like two points of view, where most of it is historical and pieces of it are contemporary, you might want to get them on board signing some form of permission to allow you to, like I'm thinking out loud, so that if they feel this is their story to tell, you want to make sure that you're kind of in the clear with them, having interviewed them. Anyway, but no, I think the question is if that's not possible, maybe anchoring this, having an opening scene that has the contemporary piece, and then the dive back is then the vast majority of the book is in the historical part, so that you don't have to navigate the trickiness of the current character, the people who are here today. Sorry. It's a really intriguing question, though, because most of the time when historical fiction is done, the people are in the past, and you don't have to worry about um, sharing, any kind of private information or telling their story when it's theirs to tell. So maybe talking with them and asking if they'd be okay, and with greenlighting using them in the story. And if they're not okay, asking them if they're okay with you changing a name in order to accomplish it. That would be my first gut reaction. And what about the narrative nonfiction? Did you decide not to go? Narrative nonfiction is also, I should probably have said this to George, is very difficult right now. Narrative nonfiction and memoir. I mean, publishing is difficult always, but those two genres in the last, year have been particularly hard. And so I'm curious, um, if you decided which one you're going to definitely do, the narrative nonfiction or the historical fiction. Sounds like you're leaning towards the historical.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of still kind of struggling to decide because of this tricky problem. And if anything, I've sort of been leaning to nonfiction just because as a journalist, I feel like I have more street cred sort of in the nonfiction world. And also because I could potentially sell it on proposal, if it's nonfiction versus having to draft the whole manuscript. So
That's
that's all.
absolutely true. I mean, the requirements are different for nonfiction and fiction when it comes to the amount of time. Although when you're doing a good proposal for nonfiction, there's an enormous, I mean, you're laying the foundation for the book. So that kind of groundbreaking requires a lot of thought and a lot of work. So in some ways, it may not be as much time, but it is perhaps as much effort, because if you do the proposal right, then the writing of the narrative will be much smoother and easier. So yeah, it may be saying, I think that it sounds like an intriguing story, whichever container you decide. Um, as a journalist, probably I've seen it go both ways. I have authors who are journalists who've gone to fiction. You could try and, write it as a nonfiction story and see, write it first as nonfiction and see if there's more to be done after when it comes to fiction. I don't know. I'm going to shush and let you ask more questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Julie. Okay, Samantha, I dropped you somehow last time, so I'm going to add you this time. What's your question?
Thank you, Sharon. I think I lowered my hand too quickly. Thanks so much, Heather, for being with us tonight. This has been really helpful. So my question, and this is kind of telling a story secondhand, but a friend of mine who's in my writers group is part of an MFA program. She was in New York last week and meeting with some editors at Macmillan. And one particular editor said to her, we would appreciate getting work much more early than, some of the agents like to see it, in terms of how they want to see it fully baked. And the advice I've always heard is never submit anything that isn't ready for publication. So it was interesting to hear this feedback, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So this is a fiction editor saying they want to see it early.
Yeah.
I've never heard that ever. My experience is the opposite.
Okay.
Now, maybe this particular editor was interested in this particular person's work and wanted an early kind of way to get to it.
Sure.
But my experience has been that because of just how extraordinarily busy editors are, they want things to be not just baked, they want it frosted. Like they want the candle and like the sprinkles and everything else on top. Yeah. I love hearing this. I just have not I have not seen it in action.
I know I'd never heard this before either, and I should clarify, it wasn't fiction. She writes memoir, so I don't know if that makes a difference.
That's a little different because then they have a hand in the shaping of the direction then the narrative is going. I do think that there's a different set of rules when it comes to nonfiction, whether it's memoir, or more practical works, editors there do like to get their their fingers on it. In fact, I think they get more excited about the proposal sometimes than the finished work. And I don't say that to be snide. It's that a proposal is all possibility. It's all, and an editor can imprint on that what they think it might be. And once something is already fully done, they don't have a way of shaping it. So yes, with that makes sense. That gels with what I've seen in
Okay.
experience as an editor too.
Thank you.
Let me add a quick question here, Heather. So, a lot of times I know that in terms of the editing and shaping of memoirs, like if it's a narrative memoir and not a collection of personal essays, but it has like one arc, one line through it, that it's often edited as fiction, like in the dev editing pre-agenting world. So are you seeing most of those submitted as, pitched as proposals or pitched as manuscripts?
Most memoirs that I'm seeing are already manuscripts.
Already manuscript. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Most that I've seen are already, but um, but I have to say, memoir has been one of those genres that have broken my heart so often that I may not be requesting as many proposals as I have, received manuscripts. Yeah, it's just a hard. If you're not a celebrity, if you're not someone who has, you know, a specific strange tale to be told. I mean, there's so many different things. It's just it is just a heartbreaker. I have an author who has written this gorgeous, gorgeous book and was just nominated for, oh, I'm not supposed to say, I can't tell. Just nominated for something that's not been announced yet. Um and the path that she was on to make this book, I mean, we went at this three different times, three different versions of this to get it published. So yeah, memoir is just hard because everybody wants to tell their story, and publishing has not figured out how to reach readers with those stories unless there's massive platform behind them for the most part, and not exclusively. There are the educateds of this world, but they're fewer and further between.
Mhm.
Not to just, I never want to tell people who are writing memoir not to do it. I just want to make them aware that, it's hard.
Hey, Emily, what's your question?
Thanks so much, Heather. This has been wonderful. Really great questions. So my question is pertaining to back when you were talking about the real estate that you put on your query letter. And I'm curious, I know I heard you say, don't want to sort of echo back something we may have read or you may have said, but how about talking about why we're querying you in particular? Do you want to know that, or so that it doesn't feel like this is just a blanket query letter to anybody, or is that not important to you?
It's not important to me. You know, I think that sometimes authors feel that they need, and I'm not saying this is your question, that authors feel like they need to flatter the agent in advance or show that they've done their homework, that they know what they represent. I'm going to always assume that an author knows that in advance. Like I don't want them to waste any of the time that they have with that query letter, um, presenting to me things that I already know, right?
Yeah.
And the why they chose to send it to me. I mean, if somebody read one of my author's books and they really loved it and they had some fantastic thing to say about an author, that might capture me, much more so than somebody trying to woo me specifically. um
Right. No, that makes
yeah.
sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Emily. And again, I'm gonna just pop in and ask one more question here then. So the other, when you're working on query letters, the other little kind of must-do section is talking about yourself and your own writing chops. So is that important to you, or is it all in the proof is in the pudding, basically? going to come
I
down to.
think I do think that's important, but it's important um, in the selling of the work, right? Selling me on on the author, that's in the construction of that query, that kind of paragraph at the end about you, that really is about how we're going to sell the author to the publisher. And so those are important details to have, writing that you've done, the workshops you've done, whatever it may be, that kind of shows who you are as a writer and what is important to you and why this is important to you. Yeah, that can be very meaningful. If there is a personal piece to it, people, it can it can also be useful, right? If there's some deep personal reason for why you wrote this, yes, but the bio is important. I don't think it needs to usually be more than a paragraph of that letter, though.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Monica.
Okay. Thanks for being here, Heather, and thank you
Sure.
for putting this together. I love coming to these. And my question goes back to what you said about the editor-agent lunch has been sort of replaced in COVID, and I'm just wondering if the fact that people are sort of talking about books in a different way now, I wonder what replaced that and how it affects the way that books are sold, if you know.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I'm not saying that agent lunches don't happen at all. The editor agent lunches don't happen at all. I just don't think that they're as ubiquitous as they had been prior. Some of what's replaced that has been, a Zoom tale or like a half hour Zoom coffee with an editor. Um, but some of that really deeply personal touch has just left the building. Some editors don't want those types of relationships or don't see the value for them. I think that sometimes some of and I don't mean to sound ageist in the opposite direction. I think that if you grow up as an editor today and you're very young getting started and you've grown up when submissions are just coming, you may not see a value to developing relationships with agents because you're always going to be fed, right? And so I do think that there, that may be an area where, because of this overwork that is so constant, that may be breaking down those relationships a little bit. What's replacing them is email, and sometimes you can still get people on phones. It used to be, lots of in-person meets with people and lots of phone time. And the phone was being replaced by email, prior to the pandemic for sure, but it's certainly accelerated it. But I don't have really any deep answers there. It is shifting. I'm lucky enough that I've been doing it so long. But you know what I'm seeing too, and there are some young editors that I have seen in the last 6 months or so that are reaching out. They want to be known. Some of them are starting to, to realize the value of relationships, and some people are just too overwhelmed to really think about shoring them up. And I don't know the fix for that because I don't know how you fix a business that's basically been built, for a long time in a way that doesn't make an inordinate amount of sense. You wouldn't build publishing the way that it's built if you were to start a business today. And yeah, I think something has been lost in the fray, and I wish that that it hadn't. But I don't know how you get it back.
Well, on that sad note,
Sorry.
Thank you for the question, Monica. Carol, if you don't mind, Heather, because we're already over time, can Carol ask the last question and then,
Sure, I can definitely. I'm like already loopy, so I'm happy to keep answering if you want me to.
all right, Carol.
Uh, I actually wrote out my question so I can read it really fast, and now it's left my screen. So hang on a second. Um, so I was both intrigued and horrified by what you said about comps because I was trained early on that you should always include comps in a query, and the way I use them is to I don't adhere to these rules about how old it is or whatever it was a bestseller. It just has to be recognizable, but I use them to tell the person reading it kind of frame what my book is, what world it's in, or what genre and world it is in, and then how it might read. And then I go on and give my my own synopsis, jacket copy kind of thing right after it. Um, and is that going to be a turnoff for a whole bunch of agents? I've had pretty good luck with this query, but um, is that
I can't speak to other agents about that because comps are part of the business. Comps are my personal, like I don't love them, but that doesn't mean that other agents don't appreciate that framing. Some people won't get the references to comps that people give, and then it can actually not be information. It doesn't provide. I'm not saying you're a query, but
Yeah.
sometimes people will give comps, and they're comps that of books I've never heard of, right? And so that's not helped them move their query forward. But that's my own personal thing. It's predicated on being an editor for 20 years and hating having to do comps for sales and wanting instead to really treat each book as an individual item. So that's don't listen to me on that. If it's working for you, then keep doing it.
this is working? The thing is in my mind, I guess I think that if the person doesn't know those, they probably not going to be a fan of my work. So that kind of goes through my mind. If you like this, you're going to really like mine, kind of thing. And I look at, the terrible MSWL and stuff like that, and I do look at what their favorite books are and stuff. But anyways, no, I just wondered. It's the first time I'd heard somebody say that about comps.
Yeah, that's just my own personal thing.
Okay, well, thank you, Carol. And thank you so much, Heather, for staying up with us. And
Sure.
yeah, and I hope that you enjoyed it. We had a great time. There's, lots and lots of comments in the chat about how useful this has been to everyone. But so if everyone can put their mics back on so that we can give Heather a round of applause and a big heartfelt thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Heather. It's just been such a pleasure speaking to you again. And I'm very sorry that I goofed on a couple of facts early on.
Oh gosh, no. I wouldn't. No apologies needed at all. No.
Well, I'm usually better prepared than that. I think I got just too excited to get to the setting of the table.
And I feel like I flubbed. I flubbed on that one.
No, not at all. I actually just love that metaphor, and I love the lying down with your authors when they so I can't wait to speak to you again. Thank you so
I
much.
look forward to it. I look forward to it, and thank you. All right, everybody, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.
All
Bye.
right, good night.